Hi, welcome to episode 49 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we've all been living in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whiddon, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Savana Maxon, who lives in Idaho, near Boise, in the southeast part of the state. Savannah and I were connected by a mutual friend, Nic Adams, who actually was a guest in episode 25. Savannah, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
Hi, Michael. Yes, thank you. I'm so honored to get to be here. This is my first official podcast, so I'm a little bit of a newbie. My name is Savannah. I live in, well, I grew up, I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho, which I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with. Now I'm just on an off little city called Meridian. It's really interesting though, growing up here in Boise. We've had a lot of growth, especially the last couple of years. So now it just seems like Boise has turned into this big, huge city. If you were coming to the area visiting, you wouldn't really know where Boise ends, where Meridian begins. So I mean, it's kind of colluded a little bit. However, yes, I was born and raised here. Now have four kids of my own. I work remotely in a consulting company, so I get to help support and bring solutions for HR and operations. It started here in a company that was in Meridian, Idaho. However, now I get to branch out and support different organizations all over the United States, as well as also into Mexico as well too. So technology has been really great, I think, in opening opportunities for just different talented individuals to come together and connect. So I joke that I fell into it. I didn't initially think this is where my career would get to go, but I think just the love of people and helping others has opened a lot of doors for me. So very grateful.
Yeah, wow. Do you so you said it's all like how many people are you taking care of in your role?
So right now, my individual company. So I work for a company called Lucro Consulting. We mainly support banks. It's really just the three of us, me and the other two founders. However, I in the just last 3 months, I've supported four other organizations, even stepping in as a fractional COO for an up and coming company out of Austin, Texas. So I mean, the amount of different companies and organizations and leaders that we get to interact with is pretty varied. I think just being the nature of consulting and, where you find success in consulting is all about relationships. So, I mean, it takes us all over the place and into all different kinds of conversations. I've consulted on marketing strategy. I've consulted on diversity and equity, inclusion strategies, engagement. Currently, right now, I'm just getting brought into an up and coming custom menswear business, which is really cool. It's predominantly being ran and dominated by men. However, I have this opportunity to come and support a women owned startup. So I don't know, Michael. I love it because I think, there's need for innovation. There's this need for approaching operation from a different scope, a different way that business has been done and bringing different players to the table. So I love that I get to kind of be a part of all of these different stories, even if it's just a small little blip, empowering individuals, bringing them tools and resources to really to take off. It's what gets me up in the day.
Wow.
So
So I mean, so you referred to the growth in Boise. You also referred to like the technology, and I would imagine that kind of goes a bit hand in hand in terms of people. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it would
yeah.
seem that people are, I guess, obviously moving to Boise, and maybe it's because they can still do their jobs remotely. But it also means that if you're in Boise and you've been there, you're also able to reach out more. Is that a correct interpretation
Yeah.
of the impact of technology?
Absolutely. So just, I guess, to back up just a little tiny bit, Boise has always been one of these really big, I think, central hubs. I did a little bit of research just to make sure, like, my interpretation of growing up in Boise and the diversity that I was exposed to was accurate. But I found out in preparing for this in 1975, Idaho was actually one of the states that signed it became one of the main refugee states in the United States with these programs. The refugee assistance program was actually started and signed. And since then, there's been a lot of different influxes of different cultures, which growing up, I actually was involved in different programs, didn't have the best upbringing, was awarded a state. So I think I kind of got a little bit more introduction to, just different individuals who had a rough upbringings, who was trying to like overcome this adversity that they had been faced with. But I mean, I even have friends that I know who were immigrants from different countries. So Boise has always been one of those really supportive, tolerant communities. And so I feel blessed because, you hear, I think throughout the United States, different individuals, you kind of have those cliques or those groups. For me, growing up, I got to experience, a lot of different Chinese families, a lot of different families from Afghanistan. In the 90s, we had a lot of Bosnians coming in that were dealing with different, religious persecution. So growing up for me, like this whole supporting diversity, bringing different people to the table isn't something that's new to me. And I think because that influence that I had growing up, it's definitely helped strengthen my ability to like bring people in and encourage that. And then just with the growth of the tech space, to give you some background, like I definitely have seen an influx. We've got a lot of individuals moving from California, Washington, and Oregon here to Idaho. I think Silicon Valley used to be one of the biggest tech hubs for, Facebook, Apple, all of those really big tech leaders. But just with the influx of cost, not just to operate a business, but also for employees to live and have those livable wages. Boise has become a pretty big hub. We've got some pretty big players. Even Facebook is building a new facility. Meta just bought a bunch of land in another offset city called Kuna, which is like 15 minutes from where I am. They're building a huge facility. And I think some of that appeal is the lower costs and taxes, not just for the business, but also that lower cost of wages for their employees as well, too. So, but I mean, if you drive down the freeway, you can see a lot of these big tech companies hub up. We've got another big one is Paylocity. They specialize in like human resource systems. Micron has always been one of the biggest leaders. I know growing up, that used to be where a lot of individuals were employed, Micron, Hewlett Packard. So I think it's always kind of been like a little bit of a buzz, but it's definitely expanding mostly because of that cost of living that I think our community supports, and companies can give back and create that cost of living to build that up and bring that into their package too. So
yeah, it's you're. I mean, in these first few minutes, you're already kind of like, I guess, dispelling, I think, a perception that people would have of Idaho, and I think that I think part of the reasons that I've done this podcast is I think that everybody is so busy and has so much going on that there are snippets of information that we all get in the news or whatever, and that just registers, and then that just is okay. That's it. That's what that state's like. That's what New York City like. I saw a report about a crime, so therefore New York City, a city of 8 million, that's really big, is just crime ridden, and it's not. There are problems, but it's not that. And what you're describing of Idaho is not like, I don't know, like I just pictured, potatoes and and farmers. Like you really don't know what to think. So like I said before we started, like I felt very actually awkward preparing for this because I don't even have, I think, the framework to ask even partially like informed questions, because I didn't even really know where to start, but you're kind of leading on us in that direction. So
yeah, well, it's really funny you say that because, I think, well, I know most native Boiseans and Idahoans are like, no, we want to be that like unkept secret. Like, stop spreading the word. Stop coming here. In college, I was working at a call center, and all of our calls were routed to the south. And I remember there was one individual who asked me where I was. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in Idaho. They're like, oh, Ohio? And I'm like, no, Idaho. They're like, wait, don't you just have dirt roads and potatoes? Like, how are you working in a call center talking to me right now? And I mean, this wasn't that long ago, Michael. And I was just like, yes, like we have roads, we have cities, like more than
electricity
potatoes.
and your Wi-Fi.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We didn't have Wi-Fi back then. It was still like,
Okay.
connected.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyways, yes, like we had normal everyday things, but I just thought it was really funny. Like at first they couldn't even register where we were, and then immediately the first thing you think of is potatoes. So it's like that I think a lot of people have that misconception. It's like dirt roads, country songs, just farmers in their pickup trucks, but it's definitely a lot more diverse than that.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So, well, how do I mean? And I think that sometimes like a lot of these like a lot of the things that I think you hear or the tensions or like whatever that we might read about or sense or think that could be is I think kind of human nature, right? And I think human nature is, I mean, in some respects there could be an undercurrent of negativity, but also there's just people don't like change, right? Like if my
mhm.
wife wants to move the couch 6 inches, I can be like, no, no, don't do that, right? So when there are bigger, more fundamental changes in a community, it is understandably going to trigger some people who don't like the change for whatever reason, and then for other things. So like, does the influx of people, has that led to like a change, or like are people okay with like the kind of the changing demographics, or has it been happening for so
Yeah.
long that it's not that big a deal?
Well, I think it's come in waves. So, it's like to paint a little bit of a picture. So, my parents were actually, I like to joke and say they were California refugees, right? They fled California to come here in the 80s. And I remember growing up, there was a little bit of that hostility, I guess, if you will, where, there was all of this different influx coming into Boise, even back then. I remember I'd be like, oh, yeah, my parents are from California. And there was kind of that like nose up, oh, California. Yet at the same time, again, like as I mentioned, we're this big, huge refugee hub. So, like, I think there's a little bit of acceptance for diversity. However, for some reason, there's almost like I think it's more of the financial aspect. A lot of times when individuals move from big metropolitan areas like California, Seattle, I think the misconception is that they're bringing in all of this extra money and bumping out some of the individuals who grew up here in Boise. I mean, I can attest to that. I bought a house in 2009 for $80,000. Today, I could go turn around and sell that house for $460,000. And I mean, that's just in a matter of what, 10 years, 11 years. So there's definitely an increase financially. And I know, a lot of people who were born and raised here are kind of getting pushed out just because that cost influx, you can't keep up. Um, I think also, with the influx of the tech that's coming in, if you step up and kind of embrace that sort of career, you can kind of help offset it. But a lot of the everyday people, I know there's a hard situation going on with like the rental costs as well too. Just that initial cost of living, that's one thing that I've seen really struggle. And I think that's where you sometimes get some animosity or some frustration with individuals who've grown up here because they feel like they're getting forced out of their home. So definitely a little bit of misbalance, if
Yeah.
you will.
Well, I mean, in the city, the term that people will use is they'll talk about gentrification, because
Yeah.
usually those influxes have like a racial overtone, but it's the same issue. And I even like feel it sometimes, like when you see like new businesses coming in, and it's like there's no respect for like the local culture, and it does definitely drive prices up. But it's definitely kind of a mixed blessing, because the people like in my neighborhood. I live in like Cobble Hill, Brooklyn. You know, 4 subway stops from Manhattan, but like in our neighborhood, it was heavily Italian, and there were people that had been here for generations, and their homes now they could sell for 2, 3, 4 million dollars. And on the one
Yeah.
hand, it's like all this influx of people causes those old favorite neighborhood shops to change. But it also means that the people who've been there for a while can retire with a pretty nice nest egg that wasn't really
Hmm.
part of the plan. So it's you can see the I guess it's complicated, right? And the
Yeah,
people who are
it
coming to
is.
Idaho are like, look, I got squeezed out of California, I couldn't afford California, so I'm coming to someplace cheaper. It doesn't make it easier, but I think that's maybe, I mean, the beauty of being in such a large country is that there's opportunities, but maybe there isn't. And like, as you were talking, one of the things that just got me thinking is like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that if you live like more among nature, right, you're already dealing with a lot of like the unpredictability of nature, but you at least feel like you can control things with your hands. When there
Yeah.
are these kind of like forces that are nebulous and intangible that are having a tremendous impact on your life, and you're not like in that space, it must be very understandably frustrating to feel like you're just kind of getting, for lack of a better word, like screwed for no reason to have to change
Yeah.
your life.
Right, absolutely. Well, and I think it's just to your point, the nature of humanity. There's some people who have embraced the growth, who have embraced the shift in technology, has embraced the shift in just like how Boise has grown and embraced in that. I mean, I'm a direct result of that. I grew up with not a lot. I was awarded the state, and so again, I was in state programs. I think that's what got me a lot of influence to the diversity and the culture that I did. And, I could have been a victim to how I grew up or what I was subjected to. But instead, I kind of allowed that to fuel myself and learn and grow from that. BSU was even a pretty diverse university. I think mostly just because of it was a little less expensive at the time. To, to this is going to totally age me, but I started going to BSU when our football team wasn't great. Like they used to like dole out tickets just to fill the stadium and get people to come in. One of the years I was there was actually when Boise State University started doing really, really good at football, and it kind of brought in a lot of revenue. It brought in a lot of attention. It started making our university a lot more prevalent, and programs are getting funded, and now it's got a pretty decent reputation. It's funny, to your point with like the evolution of cities and towns and people. You have to kind of go with that flow and lean into that current. And sometimes I think it's uncomfortable and it's scary, and that's why a lot of people like back up and just, instead of embrace it and grow with it, will blame it, like, oh well, I'm getting pushed out, or that it's that victim mentality. And I think that's sometimes where, for me as someone who likes to come in and help with engagement and training and upskilling leaders and individuals, I see that as an opportunity, because I think it's really just that empowerment thing. I think a lot of individuals struggle seeing their own potential and having that belief. So I don't know. I don't even know where my head was going with that thought.
No.
But you do see individuals who have really grown with that challenge, that growth and increase in population, different changes in business. All of those things come in as well too. Idaho, I know, is really recognized as being an agricultural state as well too. We still have quite a bit of farmland, more outside of the cities, but I've even seen such a shift in really what I hear is coming out of Idaho, and just the trajectory of like that business focus as well too. That being said, like Idaho still, it's potatoes, it's farming, it's those type of things. There's a company called JR Simplot where they've really taken, I think, leadership and not just embracing agricultural, but really like trying to figure out how they can be that greener imprint and change like farming and agricultural. But again, it's that, what are you willing to do to like step up and be different and embrace change and evolution, right? It can't just be stagnant. It can't just be the same. And I think that's where some people struggle with growth and change in general, big or small. So
Yeah. Well, I was sorry. Yeah, you had mentioned that you were a ward of the state, and I don't know if what you're
no,
comfortable talking about, but
I'm an
just
open book.
but like when you had talked about like, I guess the resistance to change, and the because of like feeling like a victim, and understandably that might indeed be the case. You're a victim of changing circumstances, and you have to decide how you adapt to that situation. Like I guess given like what you had gone through, like I guess to be where I don't even know like what your life would have been like, but I could imagine that could have pushed you in a very different mindset. Like how did you not end up, I guess, feeling frustrated or victimized, and be able to have
Yeah.
the strength to change?
So I kind of smile and laugh as you're asking me this question, because I think for me, one of my defense mechanisms is to reflect or deflect and help others. So being awarded the state and being forced to go into these programs, like I really just don't want to be there. I'm not going to lie, Michael. Like that was not what I wanted to do as a teenager. Like I already kind of had a difficult like high school experience because of the situations that I was forced to be in other kids my age weren't going through. So, I try to connect with friends. I try to reach out and have people to support me in what I was going through, but no one could grasp that. I was kind of like looked at as, not I don't want to say a reject, but like just kids my age weren't understanding what I was going through. So it was almost
Yeah.
like a rejection.
Hmm.
So when I was in these programs and counseling, instead of focusing on myself and having that risk of being rejected, I supported others. I'd reach out. I'd almost like talk to them about their situations and try to find that positivity and, put so much focus and emphasis on them and how I could build them up. But it was also like a way for me to like not focus on myself. I don't think that's natural. I think
Yeah.
it's kind of it's turned into like a superpower and a gift that I have and I've brought into other ways. Just that ability to connect, that ability to have empathy, and say you're not alone. I've been there. I understand what you're thinking and what you're feeling. It's helped me not just personally but also professionally in a bunch of different ways as well too. I don't think I realized what I was doing at the time. Again, it was like that self preservation, it was that protectiveness. But
Right.
in leading into that and embracing and supporting others, it constantly challenged me to not settle. Even if I didn't necessarily feel like I deserved better, I felt like I had to continue to get up and show up and be present. And through that, I kind of came along. It's only been the last couple of years that I guess I've done the healing and done the self work to recognize that this is what I've done my whole life.
Hmm.
But it's also kind of beautiful. I think sometimes when individuals are put in really hard spots, though, it's not easy for people to step up and embrace that. Though it's really hard to kind of get stuck in that negativity. And for me growing up, I was constantly told all of these things I couldn't do, I wouldn't be, you weren't this, and I could have like let myself get lost in that, and not to say like I still don't have that negative record, but it's that active choice that I make to get up every day and show up and be present for others. um, Whether or not I believe it in myself, it's just that desire to again help others, be there
Hmm.
for others. That I guess is what pushes me to answer your
Wow.
question in
Yeah.
a very
No. No.
long-winded way, right?
And did you ever, I mean, I guess, did you ever like think or like feel a desire to get away from Idaho because it had been like kind of the site of, I guess, so much your challenges earlier on in your
So much
life?
trauma. Yeah. I actually moved. So I say I was born and raised in Idaho. I did move away for just a couple of months to a city called Vancouver, Washington. It's just right across the river from Portland. However, I had just gotten reconnected with my mom and my brother. So I ended up like coming back at least once a month to see them. And then my mom was having a hard time. So I ended up moving back to like help her get her feet back on the ground and just make sure my brother, had food on the table, had a roof over his head, to just kind of help support my mom and him and make sure things were okay. That's what ended up bringing me back. Um, so I don't know. I don't really feel like even though I went through a lot of abuse, a lot of trauma, and a lot of situations that like I would have ran away. Like I don't know. I don't associate my hometown to that stuff.
Mhm.
It was particular houses or buildings, but that doesn't necessarily wreck like the whole city for me, thankfully.
Right.
So
No, it's it's interesting to, I guess, to think about like your earlier years compared to now, because I guess there's different ways of leaning into kind of being more, I guess, compassionate and empathetic. Like, it could be kind of selective, and I think that's one of the things that I think I perceive as, I guess, the challenge for people is that we've got to be, if you're really going to be compassionate and empathetic, it's got to be kind of unconditional, not just to people that you relate to, but to people that you don't relate to. And I think, to
yeah,
me, like, one of the things that I think might be lacking in New York a bit is there's a compassion for people that you can relate to, either fellow New Yorkers or things that you hear in the news that you understand, but the things that you don't understand, and this often kind of goes by like political, like, lines, is it doesn't get the same level of compassion just because you don't understand it. So you take what little information you have, which is skewed a certain way, and you don't have the compassion that you should. And it sounds like for you, you've expanded your sense of compassion to like kind of really having your career staked on like spreading I guess the word and helping people deal with like diversity on lots of different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that was just something that I didn't even intentionally participate in. It kind of happened for me. The tech company that I was working for at the time, we primarily had a hub here in Meridian and then, or Boise, and then we also had an office in Sacramento, California. Um, excuse me. And Sacramento is in Northern California for those who aren't as familiar with the geographic setup of California. It's so broad. California, in Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay, like that area is very, very heavy tech focused. Sacramento is more northern, but they're also kind of experiencing an influx in technology, and some of these new innovative companies moving in here just because of the cost to operate business, the cost for the employees, to make a manageable, enjoyable lifestyle. So we kind of focus on those two sections intentionally. However, then COVID happened. All of a sudden, the way we were building the business, structuring business, supporting it, kind of got flipped upside down. We went from being in two predominant areas with maybe a handful of remote employees that we knew from connections to branching up to 37 different states. We went from a team of 70 to 280 employees. I onboarded 187 employees throughout the whole United States.
Wow.
So, I mean, talk about a shift in culture, because now all of a sudden, we have this team who's so used to being, office centric, now being spread out amongst the whole United States. You open up this whole new network for talent that was untapped, and we just wouldn't have had access to, staying so regionally focused. But you also have this challenge with like, okay, how do we help everyone feel connected? How do we help create that team and environment dynamic? How do you keep people from burning out because you're sitting on screen all day? Like, it's just a totally different shift in how you approach business, how you successfully run teams, how you successfully also interact with clients. It was a challenge, but I think COVID was that for so many different companies. And kind of talking about change and embracing change, and rising with that challenge or sinking with that challenge. It's kind of the same thing that happened with COVID. You see a lot of companies who just couldn't keep up with that change in demand or creativity with how to succeed. And even now, like, I think you can't open up LinkedIn or the news and see all of the different layoffs. It's kind of that same influx. A lot of that came from that growth, came from that trajectory, came from that unknown, and just can't figure out the right equations, or can't bring those teams together to really work cohesively. And so I don't know. I think change is one of those relevant things. And I think some really great things come out of change. You see a lot of different tech companies come out, a lot of different ways to approach business right now. Like, AI is really big. Like, chat GPT is something that is a really big buzzword. You now have these systems and processes that can collect and organize information way faster than an employee can. So sorry, we just went down a rabbit hole, but that being said, like, it's so interesting to me when you think about change, when you think about diversity, because like, it's really everywhere. I think a lot of people think diversity is like Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, all of those type of things. I feel like sometimes you get that polarized. You get the people who support it, or the people who just think it's virtue signaling, and it's just these initiatives to like kick up buzz. But again, you kind of have to embrace some of it. You have to support other people. You have to have that empathy to try to understand where they're coming from. You almost have to take right or wrong off of the table and look at it from a person or a holistic point of view. It's the same thing with business too. I mean,
Yeah.
So much of it is that same component, that same makeup. You can reject the change and stay your ways, and dig your heels in the sand and have that victim mentality, or you can really just try to like come from a place of understanding and see how things are showing up for you or others,
Yeah.
sorry, I just did a
No, no,
tangent.
no, 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 no. Well, I mean, the track record for history would suggest that there are certain currents that you really can't resist, and and I think
Yeah.
for the better in large part. I mean, like the women's movement and ERA of like the '70s, or go back even to like 1920s. Those happened, and I think it's amazing to see. Like, I was in the Navy when women would just start to being introduced onto like combatant like ships. Like, they were allowed to do, like, they had lots of roles, but they couldn't actually be in combat. And when I was in the Navy in the
Mm-hmm.
like mid '90s, they were just starting to do that. And now you see women who are like captains and admirals, and like it's great to see. It's to me, like, when I wrote a law review article on this way back when, and to me, I felt like the argument for the idea of being open to, I guess, trying to, and I'll go past it. It's not just about like racial or gender or whatever, but just being open to making sure people have an equal opportunity. Is that there's a value for all of us. Like, you want the best doctor possible taking care of you, not the best white male Christian doctor. So I think that's for everything. That's not just a doctor. That's like for your politicians or the people working in your office. Like, you want the most talented and the people who are meant for those roles. Like, I don't think I was meant to work in corporate America, but and I haven't for a number of years now. But 50 years ago, I would have had to slog it away as a as a white collar worker, because that's what my trajectory was, and that's what a white man did. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's good. I think, to me, what I feel like in New York, like my perspective on things, is that we have to take that notion of diversity, though, and now even expand it even further to to understand diversity is also about professional diversity. Because you can
Yeah.
have, in New York City, you can have racial diversity, but it's actually harder to get professional diversity. Like, to have a doctor and a police officer at the same party is a pretty rare phenomena. You can get black and white and Latino and Arabic and Asian and whatever else, but you're not going to have that professional diversity or educational diversity. You can go to a law firm that's got a lot of Harvard Law graduates, but how many of them are from the state law school or from Rutgers or something less prestigious? So I think there's that, and then there's like the regional and political diversity, which is embracing all the different ways you can slice and dice people and really embrace all the potential that's out there. At least that's my perspective.
No, well, and you touched on something so huge. I think embracing that diversity is what can be that differentiator as well too. As far as in terms of like what I do all day, every day, I consult on business strategy and operations. I mentioned a few of the companies that I specifically have been helping are women owned, who are trying to break into this network or this industry, who predominantly is male owned. I think sometimes in business, businesses grow to such a height where it's stagnant, or let's go to that menswear where it's fashion. Predominantly those hubs, most of those companies are out of New York. So when I come in to consult, I challenge. I'm like, why do you guys do these things? Why does the industry approach it this way? The answer I always hear, Michael, is, well, that's just how it's always been done. I think you see a lot of diversity coming from different mindsets of like cultural leaders, women leaders, because not just because they're women or they're cultural, but because they're asking different questions. They're approaching it in different lights. They're approaching it with a different perspective. Whereas, it's been predominantly ran one way just because that's how it always was done before. So you can see that evident in all different tech spaces, industry spaces. I think that's why you're seeing so many more of these like Black owned companies, women owned companies, that's carrying so much light, not because it's Black owned, women owned, but because they're running their business in a way that has never been done in that industry before. And I
Yes.
think that's something that is not, gosh, I'm getting goosebumps talking about that. I think that's something that sometimes gets looked over because it gets that label put onto it. But I think it's something that's so huge to recognize, or that I wish more people would talk about, because that's really what's causing these companies to make the disruption that they are.
Yeah. Well, and to me, the capitalist argument, if you will, for like diversity is that if you're in any business, right, you get started and you might have a couple of strokes of good luck or initial connections, but it seems like a lot of companies, like the natural progression of growth, is maybe 5% a year, and then you work hard, and then maybe you get a big client, or you get a little stroke of luck for a year, and then you get a little uptick, but then you revert back to that like kind of slow steady growth. And the only way to
Hmm.
get the transformative like inflection point is to do something different. And if you're
Yeah.
surrounded, and it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be race, but it could be race, but it could be education. If you have a bunch of Ivy Leaguers all together thinking the same thing, and the industry is all made by other Ivy Leaguers, you're all doing the same thing. If you have somebody who can think differently, somebody who is outside that echo chamber, it could be from Boise State, it could be wherever, that's where you get that like hyper inflection point where it's like, oh my God, like why didn't we ever think of this? Well, it's because you were all in the same echo chamber.
Yeah, exactly. And it all works for you. It helps that bottom line. You're going to laugh.
Yeah.
I have a client, I can't say who, obviously, but
Mm,
multi-million dollar revenue makers. They're still working off of Google Sheets. And so I'm like, why aren't you creating processes? Why aren't you leveraging technology? Like, why aren't you looking from this from how can you take some of this effort and time off of your employees so they can be selling more?
mm,
All they care about is what that Excel or that Google Sheet report shows them. And they see that trajectory moving up, but they're missing like, the data and that analytics behind that much more, or that projection, because
yeah.
they're stinted by their system, but that's how they've always done it. That's what they're comfortable with. Um, so now I get the opportunity to come in and totally disrupt this industry and automate so much, and it's a better experience for their employee. It's a better experience for their client. It's a better experience for their vendors, and they're going to have that better experience because that revenue is just going to go through the roof. But it's sometimes just takes someone who's not afraid to like shake it up, but do it in a very empathetic way where they don't feel stupid for missing that opportunity for so long, right? But it's just sometimes a breath, or someone who can have that external perspective, or extra considerations. I think in business you get so hyper focused on your performance and your KPIs, you forget to realize this all is interconnected to other people's goals and what they're working on and how it contributes to the overall growth too. So
Yeah.
same
Well,
thing, I think, with gosh, it's so relevant in everywhere, and it sounds so simple, but it's like even the same way that schools are ran, even the same ways you see governments ran, it's the same ways you see cities built and grown. Like it's that same concept, like everywhere. You just need a few people who aren't afraid to like ask the questions and push, or come with the solutions, or think of a different way. But that's not safe or comfortable, and I think we're such creatures of habit that it's scary for people to think about changing clicks, or changing a system, or changing a process, even if it could make it easier. So I
yeah.
don't know. I love the psychology behind change. I've done a lot of reading and studying on neuroscience and cognitive behavior, which has helped me really in approaching some of those hard conversations with C-suite and leadership, not just in changing and doing like the change management within their organization, but also how they can be better leaders. But it's done so much health and growth internally as well too, just to understand, hey, like I respond to these situations because of bio responses, because of how I was raised, or the situation that I was put into. I think we even carry some of that into our adult lives and into how we interact with each other, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
So
Well, you actually, when you just made me feel like a real Luddite, because I'm actually very happy that I've actually just started using Google Sheets. So the fact that you're talking about converting people away from that makes me feel remarkably
oh
like stuck in the trenches. But the
no,
other
okay,
thing,
we need to have another conversation, Michael. You and I need to talk offline, and I'll change your life.
no, but the other thing though is like, that notion of change, I think, is something that is, I mean, it's a big deal. And I think there's, during the pandemic, I think there was a lot of change. Just like every day, it was like a new school routine or this or that. And I'm not very good. I mean, I live in the city and I like the new things, but I'm not good with the kind of like change, new ways of doing things or new routines, because I don't know. I think I don't necessarily have a lot of self confidence. So I feel like once I figured out how to do it, I don't want to have to then do another. I have to do it all over again, or have to do something new, because change is a psychological change, is an issue, and it's a monetary issue. Like, even, I think, like, what I think in the city amongst the people like that, like, we know and whatever, like, if there's a new way of, I don't know, throwing a garbage away, like, oh, we need to get these new containers because we want to do composting, $50 to buy that new kind of bucket is not a big deal for some people. But for others, having to spend $50 for a new composting thing, which might be the right thing to do, but it's an added cost that I don't necessarily have the free money to necessarily spend. So when I think
Yeah.
about, like in New York, at least, there's a lot of stuff comes out of here, emanates from here, about change and this and that. I can see why a lot of people in New York, as well as outside New York, would just be like, like, dude, why is it why is it never good enough? Why do we always have to change? Because some people just want to be in their groove or their rut. They just want to do their 9 to 5 job and, watch, cut the lawn on Saturday and watch football on Sunday. And they don't want to have that ruined.
Yeah.
And I understand that inclination very much so, because I think I would like to be more of a routine, but you can only fight things so much. I don't know what you think about that, but
Yeah. No, I'm just over here smiling because that is something I've really had to learn in regards to changing processes, changing, different strategies. Part of what you have to do as a consultant is you have to be able to not just sell these new ideas to the stakeholders, but you also have to know how to assess the needs, assess the pain points, so that you can turn around and consider, like, the value add to the people you're asking to change. It's almost like a sales. You're selling this idea, but you have to show what's in it for me. Like, ultimately, that's how you get any change out of anyone, is what's in it for
right.
me. How is this going to make my life easier? Especially if you're asking an individual to accrue a cost to accept or adopt this change. As soon as though you show, like, what the overall goal is, what, that mission is, what that value add for them, then all of a sudden people are like, oh, I get it, because then it's an investment in either themselves or the community. But I think a lot of times when you have different regulations or different states coming in and saying, hey, you have to wear this, they're just telling you what you have to do. And naturally humans, like, resist that. They're like, well, wait, like, I have to be uncomfortable, or I have to change my routine, or I have to do this. You miss that opportunity of, like, well, why? Like,
Right.
wearing a mask, like, it's benefiting you because it doesn't spread as many germs. Like, I think so many companies or different laws, as they come in, like, they come in with the best of intent, but they don't have that explanation of the why or the benefit or the value add or that adoption. That's why a lot of times, you get so much division, I think, because you have some people who will research to understand on their own, but most people don't have time to do that or ask the questions. They just hear what they're being told, or they have those additional expectations,
Yeah.
without the understanding.
Well,
So
well,
that's, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, no. You sparked something that it's so, like, in where, like, New York. I mean, New York State is a city of 8 million. It's the largest, like, department of education in the country. And the school system is divided into, like, I don't know, 15 or 20. I don't know, so many different, like, districts, and each of those districts might have like 30 or 40 schools. Our district, for our kids, they've kind of done this. They've implemented this, like, diversity initiative, where they kind of changed the system for many of the schools, where it's less about, it wasn't about, like, kind of merit. It wasn't about meritocracy. It wasn't about kind of just, okay, you need to have, the best grades and the least amount of absences, because it became kind of this, like, self-propagating system where the kids who already had advantages at home got to go to all the good schools, and the kids who didn't have those never got access to the good schools. So they changed it up so it was a lot more just kind of like lottery, which is good. But I think what I was telling the principal for my son's middle school yesterday was like, I felt like if you're going to ask people to change, one of the things that you want to talk about is also, like you're saying, like what's in it for them. And even if it's going to be to
Yeah.
their detriment, make me feel like I'm a part of something that matters. Like I'm happy to
Yeah.
sacrifice. And you asked that in the military where I was in the Navy, like you're asking people to risk their lives and give their lives to serve their country, and they'll do it if they feel the right motivation. So I think, to me, one of those ideas of change is getting people to understand what's in it for you, either actually material benefit, spiritual benefit, or just the communal benefit. And that's got to be
Yeah.
articulated.
Gosh, well, and that's going to be such a challenging situation your school's trying to accomplish, because if that's kind of how it's been this whole time, you got to think about the parents. A lot of those parents grew up in that situation where, the rich or the privileged got all of these things. I'm always trying to be mindful of like what I say and how I show up for my kids, because like we pass our things on to the kids. I
Yeah.
I always make the joke, like, as long as you have minimal counseling because of me, I know I'll succeed. I know already you're going to have less counseling than I have because of how I was raised,
Mhm.
but I say that kind of tongue in cheek because, like, a lot of our ideals, a lot of our ideas, like a lot of the things that we were raised to believe, we communicate that to our kids, and our kids take that on without even realizing it. It's forming the way they think, forming the way they interact, forming the way they show up in the world. Well, I mean, I already shared with you I was a ward of the state, so let's get a little more vulnerable. I actually just left a pretty abusive relationship,
Oh, so
and
sorry.
so I'm having to do. Oh, thank you. It was hard, but sometimes you stay in situations. I think a lot of that was that self-limiting belief that I had, but I also wanted a different situation for my kids, not realizing staying in that situation actually wasn't benefiting them. So now, I'm extra super mindful of, the things they're hearing, the things we talk about, because I can't control what they hear when they're not with me, but I can hear what they bring back. So, I mean, I spend a lot of my time talking with my kids about different things they hear, not just with my ex, but also like at school with their friends. Sometimes even YouTube. I mean, I don't know if your kids love YouTube, but my
Yeah,
kids love watching YouTube.
sure.
So the things they hear and pick up, I'm just like, whoa, let's have a conversation about this. And I don't think parents do that a lot of times because it takes energy, it takes effort, and sometimes it's talking about really hard topics or conversations that parents don't think their kids are ready to hear. But oh my gosh, Michael, like kids are subjected to so many opinions, so much ideas, so much of that mindset that, if you don't have a parent that's super willing to like have a conversation even with a little person, like it's hard because, those kids bring those limiting beliefs in with them. So I can see why maybe that adoption is struggling a little bit, because you've got that generational breakdown that you almost have to work through, and different values you got to bring in to get that buy-in too, I guess, is where I'm going. So
Yeah, no, yeah, and and I think that you're talking about the kids, like there's change too, right? As a parent, you've got to either you have
yeah.
to cope with the change, and you're plugged into that, and it's an unavoidable reality that you have to be constantly dealing with, especially if you've got four kids. What are the age ranges of your children? What's the age
Oh
range?
my gosh. So my littlest just turned 4. I've got
Uh,
a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So
okay,
I've
wow.
got my hands
Oh
full.
my gosh.
Yeah.
I've got a 17, 13, and 11-year-old. At least that'll be their ages by
Oh,
summer. So yeah,
that's
it's
awesome.
yeah, it's great.
Well,
Definitely a lot of work.
so then,
Yeah.
especially I think with what having our kids have more access to technology and media and those external influences. I know growing up, I didn't have a lot of that. I used to laugh with my kids. I'm like, when I was a kid, I used to have to wait to go to the bathroom till a commercial. They could just
Yeah.
pause, or
Yes.
shoot, they just take it in the bathroom with them, right? Like I'm just like, you guys have no idea.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it's just that constant
Yes.
voice, that constant, like if you don't put that parameter, right? Like it's just that
Mm,
constant influence hitting them.
yeah.
It's definitely a different challenge, and I'm seeing that, with having my broad range of kids. My oldest had different influences than my 4-year old does right now,
Hmm.
and it's that constant mindfulness. And I think each kid is so unique and individual, anyways. But
Yeah.
it's hard being a parent, and
Yeah.
so I know sometimes, like, in terms of like hearing you share with what your school's trying to do, I can see some of my friends even be like, well, I didn't have that when I was a kid, or just even kind of rejecting that internally,
Hmm.
how that could be passed on to the kids as well too. I mean, gosh, there's a lot of different influences your school district is up against. So
Yeah. It's
I'm like,
complicated.
I want to come help them, but
No,
that's just what I do. I hear problems and I want to solve. So,
no, it's the thing is it's so big, and I think we're talking about like change, and I think one of the things that I think is the biggest change is like is the connectivity that technology gives us, and to me,
mhm.
like it's easy to kind of read the news and be like, oh my god, like we're falling apart as a country, but like I don't subscribe to that. I think that there are like I think the news world is doing what it's always done. It's just now like it's like a 24/7. Like it's hyper. It's on steroids
Oh
now,
yeah,
which is to our everybody's detriment. I don't care what side of the spectrum you are on politically. It's bad. But the other part of it is that we're all kind of now we're able to kind of drop in on any way of living. Like in New York, you can get a piece of news about Idaho, and you'd be like, "Well, why would they do that? That makes no sense." And the other way around, you're in Idaho, you're reading about a problem in New York, you're getting a very limited perspective, and you don't understand any of the context of like why something bad happened, what something good is, like the challenges. And I think that that's the biggest challenge, not even challenge like we can't do it, but the biggest adaptation that we need as a country is to understand that we are now more interconnected than ever. In Idaho, while on a
yeah.
map might be 2,000 miles away, we depend on them. And when in the past 200 years, it didn't make a difference what was happening in Idaho. You never read about it. It didn't impact you. But now it can impact you. You can be working with somebody from Idaho, via Zoom,
Absolutely.
and you're reading about things, and you got to stop the snap judgments about what it's like there or why somebody thought something because it's so different. And you don't even need to look at the map of the country. I mean, I think about even like apartments. Like we have 70 different units in our apartment building. I'm sure every
Oh
parent
wow.
runs their household in a different way. So we have to
Yeah.
understand we got to take that tolerance for like how people live and decide on things and extend it to a country of 330 million. And it doesn't mean you can't have your own opinions about way things should be, but you really got to spend a lot more time understanding the context of people's lives before you have a knee-jerk angry reaction to or dismissive reaction to what you are learning about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A hundred
So
percent. But I love it. I love the diversity. I
yeah.
love the difference. Like that's one of the things I love is like, I just flew to Austin a few weeks ago, and I'd love to just talk to people in the airport and hear their life stories. And shoot, I do that just walking around town as well. Like you'll laugh at this, Michael. One of my partners, he actually lives in Manhattan.
Huh?
He flew here for this award ceremony that I was in this September, and they got like a little Airbnb that was walking distance from downtown Boise, and we're just walking around, and like I'd see people like sitting on the stairs or just sitting like hanging out, just watching people, and I'd say hi to them, and he'd be like, "Whoa, we say hi to people randomly like on the street? Like you do that?" I'm like, "You don't?" He's like, "No, we don't make eye contact. Like, what are you doing?" Like, it was such a foreign concept to him. Like, why would you talk to people? But like, even every day, like, I'll talk to people like at the store. Like, I make eye contact. I try to like compliment people. Like, that's just like how I am. My daughter hates it. She's like, "Mom, can we just not? Can you just go somewhere and not talk to someone? Like, will you please just stop it?" I can't. It's just my nature. Like, I love people, and I love you know I think taking into consideration different perspectives. But again, like I think that's one thing I can give credit to. And that's like one thing when I tell people I had a really rough upbringing and people are like, "I'm so sorry." Like, I'm not sorry about it because I think I embraced it in a way that it helped shape me and give me this perspective on the world that I wouldn't have if I hadn't gone through it. And I don't think a lot of people embrace that. And
Yeah.
so, like I said, I try to hone it in as yes, this hard thing happened to me, and yes, sometimes I wish it didn't, but I can turn it into my superpower. And I wish more people would embrace that, and not take other people's opinions as a threat on how they view the world or how situations have showed up for them, but instead it's just one more way or one more lens to look at perspectives or people too. I wish I could figure that out. Oh my gosh, Michael, I'd have an amazing business if I could figure that science
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just try to show up and be present and bring that thought process to as many people as I can, and hope I can somehow slowly make a ripple.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm slowly doing it through different organizations, but it's a process. It's definitely an uphill battle. And in consulting, I mean, we lose more than we win, but when we win, oh my gosh, it's so cool to see companies change and employees feel seen and appreciated and valued and give systems that actually sets them up for success. But it's hard work because you hear a lot more no's than you hear yes when it comes to change. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's 100%.
Yeah. Well, you said something that made me think of something, and I tried to keep that in mind. I think I don't think
It's
I
fine.
can now.
We're bouncing
But
all over.
but
So
I think part of it, and I think I see this like in the city, is a couple things. And I guess here I'll talk to whoever's listening who's not from New York City. That maybe this will be helpful for them. But one, like your partner who was talking about like in Manhattan or the city, how you don't look at people in a city of like 8 million. You just couldn't say hi to everybody. But there's also like when you have so many people, like even giving money to somebody can be something where it's a scam. Like that, I personally had somebody steal $120 from me in in Philadelphia, in like when I was in college, and that was
oh my
like the first
gosh.
time I'm like, oh, like I can't, like if somebody's asking for money, sometimes they need it, but sometimes it's a scam, and like there's more to come. So it just has to happen once for you to be like, what, I'm not doing that. So it's not necessarily that you're cold, or I guess you are. You have to harden your heart, but unless you kind of feel the right vibe, you're not gonna like help somebody. So like I'll give money to somebody who's performing on the subway if I like listening to their music, or in the car or on the subway
Yeah.
platform. If I have extra food from a restaurant and I see somebody who's struggling, I might give them the food. But you don't necessarily, because you have that, because you've been hurt, or you've been hurt somehow, burnt by that.
Yeah.
And obviously maybe if I had a more forgiving heart, or maybe or a kinder heart, I'd probably do it more. But I think you see it enough. But the other thing that you made me think about was just helping people like kind of change. And I think that in a big city, you don't, nobody's here is looking out for you. Like it's too big. So basically you have to respond to the forces, to just be like, okay, this isn't working for me. I have to figure it out on my own. So I think that there's a luxury at a smaller scale to kind of like have things tailored for helping people realize their potential. And then as things get bigger and bigger, it becomes more a manipulation of numbers. And it's not really, it stops being the company's care whether or not you're realizing your potential. I put you in this spot and you didn't do your job, so that's it. And so it'd be a rare company, I think, actually help somebody be like, oh, you know what, you're being let go, but you've got really good strengths here. Like, I guess you can do it. But I think I think one of the downsides of like getting bigger and bigger and having technology help you manage people is that you start getting disassociated from the actual human beings if you're not mindful of
Yeah.
it.
No, absolutely, 100%. In fact, there was a company that I worked for that we grew tremendously, and I fully believed we needed a performance management program. They didn't see the value in it. They wouldn't invest in it. So this will give you a little bit more peace of mind, Michael. Like I slammed Google Sheets earlier, but I don't totally hate it when needed. I created a performance management system using Google Sheets, Google Surveys. It was a very clunky manual process, but I went through that initiative of doing it manually for each and every employee. It was supposed to just be for one period. It ended up being for 4 periods. And we grew the company from 70 employees up to 280 employees. So, yes, I manually did the same process for 280 employees before finally I had to like show the value of like what I was doing, how much time it took me. Here's the value add. But so I do think there is a way, like if you get leaders who genuinely care, there's even processes that you can put into place to track and manage data. But I think that's a huge disconnect that I'm seeing in a lot of companies and tech spaces is, you constantly like hear data. Like, you can't scroll Facebook without data and algorithms collecting. It's kind of the same thing with companies. Like, if you're investing in an employee, there's so much data, there's so much performance, there's so much metrics that you have. But I think a lot of industry leaders don't know what to do with it to like benefit them, and not in a way that just drives the bottom line, but really individually drives the person and the company, and then empowers those managers to build that as well too. I do think there's a way to do it. I don't think it's an exact science, and each
Sure.
approach is going to be different based off of the values that your company is built off of. But not only the values, but I always tell companies like your values almost have to be that filter that you like shove every single change or perspective or something that you lean upon to make sure it aligns with your company. If not, why is that value on the wall? It's just up there to look nice, sound nice. But really, the values are what help you make hard decisions or really help implement those changes. And if it doesn't align, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Your employees don't see the value too. So, I mean, there's different approaches, and I don't think one way to measure performance or track or encourage is wrong or right, but it's very, very rare, to your point, that I think leaders are genuinely invested in that, especially once the company gets to a certain size. And because of that, I feel like I will always have a job, thankfully, knock on wood.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard to find, because it does cost money and it does cost time to like dig into that.
Yeah.
But like companies spend so much time and energy trying to understand their customers and trying to understand, their target market and their target audience. Why aren't they doing that internally for their employees as well too?
Yeah.
But I think, the companies that do care and will invest in that, those are going to be the ones that are going to disrupt the industries. And I think the ones that really embrace that are going to be the ones that you'll see survive over the next couple of years, just my prediction. Only because, like there was the trending thing, the great movement where everyone was leaving their jobs, a lot of that was the culture and the engagement and the diversity that those companies were supporting was what was making or breaking whether employees were staying. I'm seeing a shift back just with all of the layoffs that are happening as well too. But I think once things kind of like level and balance out again, my prediction is you'll probably see another rise and increase in a lot more of those diversity programs, those engagement programs, the performance programs, especially coming up against like AI and tech. I mean, you have to find a way to show how you're succeeding and how you're contributing to the companies, not just individually to feel confident, but also to continue to increase like your growth within the company, right? So,
Yeah.
TBD. I
Yeah.
still don't know how to solve that. It's individual for each company and leader I come into, but I wanted to just bring that up because, like, again, that's one of the biggest things that I get brought in to do, because there are leaders out there who want to do that and want to provide that for their employees. They just don't know how. And there's no perfect system that's, a cookie cutter like process that companies can come in and do that. It really has to be individualized to the leaders, the company, what they're doing too.
Mm-hmm. When I was getting ready for this conversation, I was curious where it would go. I didn't think it would go so heavy into the HR or change management. So that's very cool. No, that's great. But
no, that's not anything we talked about last time either. Yeah. So I had no idea. I love it. I'll talk about it all day, every day.
But I guess the one that we have definitely covered a lot about like Idaho. But I guess before we like wrap up, is there anything else that you like for an ignorant New Yorker like me? Is there anything else about Idaho that I should understand about the state to understand what I read about the state next time I'm looking at the news?
So I will do a little bit of an Idaho plug, and all of the Idahoans listening now are going to hate me for this because it's like, keep it that unknown secret. But okay. One thing I've always loved about Idaho growing up is like you really do have even so much diversity and like activities. Like I can drive 45 minutes and there's a ski hill called Bogus Basin. So like I can go skiing and snowboarding. go a different direction, 45 minutes. We have the lakes and the reservoirs where there's like boating. Camping is also really big, fishing, hunting. What I love is even in Idaho, you kind of have different areas or hubs. Like, in Boise, it's becoming more like we've got the nightlives and the restaurants and the shopping. However, you also have some of the more trendy cities where like the celebrities go that are more posh and more swanky, right? Higher end.
Like,
Stanley, Idaho is really
okay.
big. Haley, Idaho is where a lot of the celebrities will go. And they do a lot of conferences there too. But even northern Idaho, you've got like Coeur d'Alene. So it's got like there's even diversity within the country or not the country within the state, which I think is really cool as well too. But I think a lot of states are that way. I think when there's an area that you haven't gone to, it's really easy to hear of those common cities like New York. I think of like Manhattan and the Big Apple, but even New York, there's Upper New York, there's the
Long
beaches,
Island.
there's
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gotten to learn more about New York because again, one of my partners is out of New York, so like I've gotten to be up on more than it's not just like Sex in the City and New York that's portrayed in movies where growing up, that's like all I thought New York was it's really glamorous. And then I have people who tell me like, yeah, it's a fun place to travel. It's not so fun to live. There's lots of trash. There's lots of homeless. Like, and that's just not something, definitely a lot more glamorized on TV. So, but I think that's how any state is, you have these perceived ideas of what the people are like there and what the living there is like. But I think it's so vastly different. So I know I'm excited to travel and experience more, not just the glamorous side, but
Yeah.
more in general of the whole offerings. But that's TBD. It's hard to travel when you have 4 kids.
Yeah, I can only imagine. um, yeah, well, and I think like for the New York, like I think it's almost like it goes, and I think it's more like everything can be partly true. Like there is the glamour of the Sex in the City. There is also the stinky trash. Like if you're out on like if it's a hot summer day when the restaurants have their garbage out waiting for the garbage truck to come, it's on the sidewalk because we don't have alleys. Like it's so they have to put the trash out on the sidewalk, and it can just be the most like rancid,
Oh,
unpleasant smells. But then you can walk for like a 5-10 miles, and like it's the opposite of hiking in nature, but it's like all of humanity. You can stay on Broadway and just see so many different like just densely populated areas of all like the most fascinating, interesting things. So you can like walk the world in one day.
that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
So, and like we live in the brownstone part of Brooklyn, and there's lots of other parts of Brooklyn that, might not be as nice or just different and pleasant in their own way. But I think the humility, like I've settled upon like four like virtues, but like one of them is the humility to kind of learn what you learn, but also understand that you don't know enough. You're never going to know enough about a state. And we should always, I think one of the reasons why you shouldn't have your opinions be too strong is because you never know. You never know everything. Even if you think you do, you don't. And I think that should be what kind of tempers any reaction to things. And it's not always easy to do, especially if you've got 3 or 4 kids and not enough sleep and all that
Yes.
stuff
Oh
going
my
on.
gosh. That's what coffee is for. Whenever
Yeah,
people are like,
exactly.
Savannah, you're super woman, I'm like, no, I'm super caffeinated woman. There's a difference. So,
Yeah. So, but I guess but before we wrap up, can I just ask, like, what gives you hope at the end of the day?
what gives me hope? Honestly, the biggest driver for me is my kids. Sorry. I think for me, like just because of how I grew up, I want everything for my kids that I didn't have, not just materialistic things, but like opportunities and different mindsets. And I want them to have, courage and be a little bit farther ahead than I was in life when I was their age and trying to figure out like how I can show up and make that impact. It's my kids, man, 100%. Like that's it. That's my driving force, and that's what definitely keeps me going and gives me hope. And when I get tired or discouraged, doesn't let me give up because I want that for them. I want them to have experiences. I want them to challenge things and not just settle.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I mean, Savannah, thank you so very much for agreeing to make this connection and for sharing this time. It's been a real pleasure, a real eye-opening pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Thanks so much for having me, and for Nick for recommending me
Yeah,
too
thank
as
you to
well.
Nick. All right, and thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right, thank you, Savannah. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.